I would say the growth area in our field is going to be speed. So the senior leaders who are our customers may not have even heard of Moore's, but they've heard of Moore's Law, and they want to know why. Sorry. They want to know, if the computers are getting faster, why aren't my answers getting faster? And I see big data analytics, and how come you just can't reach out and grab the right information? So the patience to wait 2 years and spend $20 million for analysis of alternatives is not there anymore. And I don't think, I fully support the SSA and our revitalization campaign analysis, but we do have to figure a way to turn that around quicker, because I don't think that they're going to tolerate waiting for another year to see a new scenario be analyzed. So I think what we need to work on as a community is coming up with good answers faster, maybe not the best answer later.
In prepping for this, I did solicit some inputs from my tech director, Dr. Steve Stoddard, and Jim Amato, and Pam Bleckinger, just so I could sort of get a feel for everything. And I'm going to steal from Steve Stoddard on this one, because I think he hit 3 key points for sure that I think Moore's brings to the table that we ought to maintain. And I try to reinforce these points with our senior leaders to sign off on our conference approval participation packets every year. But Moore's provides the DoD with what Steve described as 3 mission critical functions. And I agree with these very much so. Peer review, professional development, and exposure to new methods and technologies and approaches. I agree with all of those. I think they're very important, and that's what, in part, makes Moore's unique, and that's, in part, why I continue to participate in it, and I continue to encourage my analysts and those that I work with to participate in it. But I would offer for Moore's that we need to center on those and be the sponsors, go-to organization for all 3 of those needs. That's where I think Moore's. Let me just add one more, and this is a personal add-on, and I'll call it my network, Forrest's Network. And if you take network and mean friends and colleagues, you got what I'm talking about. I attribute all of my network, my friends and colleagues that are outside the Army, to this organization. Because if were it not for Moore's, I probably would not have crossed paths with you, be it in the other services, be it in the industry, or be it in academia. So I thank Moore's for that, and I think that's another thing that Moore's brings to the table that we lose sight of sometimes in trying to explain it to our senior leadership.
Okay, those are outstanding answers. That's what I was going to say. So the only thing I would add is I don't know that you guys, honestly, I have to admit, I don't know what your outreach program is, but I was just, in terms of the science, technical, engineering, mathematics, career field, STEM, we always need more. And I thought what I would ask is if each of you could just speak to one person the next year who's not associated with Moore's, and see if you can't recruit them at least to the science and engineering career field or to join Moore's. But anyway, I did what you.
That's a great answer.
Thank you.
Actually, I agree with Forrest, and so I had something written down here, but I'll take Forrest's answer. I think networking and peer review are 2 areas in which Moore's has tremendous strengths, and I liken it to an institution that we have at OAD, going back to the days of SNA, Studies and Analysis, predecessor organization, started probably in the early 80s by Dr. Alfred Brandstein. Many of you have known him. And that is every Friday morning, most every Friday morning, we have a session called Bagels. Somebody brings in some bagels. We've kind of changed a little bit and added the donuts to the bagels. But at the same time, we have some sort of a professional development session that goes on during those bagel sessions, or most of the time we do. And oftentimes it's a red cell session where you're getting ready to give a brief to Moore's or to a senior decision maker. And so you can try it out on a very hard crowd of analysts within your own organization. And you can get some really good direction and ideas and have some of the weaknesses in your arguments pointed out to you. So I think that in reality, Moore's, especially Moore's with 2 S's, is really like bagels on steroids. I mean, you get the entire world of military or defense operations analysts to critique your work. I think most people use it for showing work that has already been done, completed, shown to the decision makers, and this is an after-the-fact kind of discussion and briefing. And I understand that sometimes the topics are going to be a little bit more close hold and you can't always do it, but I would encourage people to make use of Moores, especially if the timing works out right, to use these sessions to vet your ideas and to help improve them so that when you do take them to the senior decision makers, they can have a lot more power, authority, and analytical backing to them than they might the first time around. And so I'm going to scrap the answer that I had put down here for you and steal Forrest's and just embellish a little bit. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Dr. Axe. I've participated in some of those bagel sessions and they're fantastic. I'll have to try the new donut session. Okay, great. Well, this is a great opportunity for you. This is our time. We don't get this collection of senior leaders across our organizations together like this very often. So this is a great opportunity. What I ask again, when you have a question, raise your hand. We have 2 mics going around. If you could stand up, introduce yourself, direct your question at one or all the panelists, but if you could just be clear on who you want to start the answers to questions, that would be helpful. Your first question.
Good morning, Dr. Rich Goodwin, Missile Defense Agency, and sir, I remember doing the budget review during the Clinton regime, and I don't remember if that was 10 or 12 ago, but it was a long while. First of all, if y'all would pretty please leverage the chain of command to tell them that the symposium's not a boondoggle, and the people should not have to go through all the crap that they got to go through in order to get to this meeting, and the TOD's work. But one of the challenges I've been working for Air Force Studies Analysis before the Senate got there, and for NH6 is Integrated Air and Missile Defense. And I know that sometimes we look at our friends from CAPE, which used to be OSDP&E, and the Joint Staff, JAMDO, and the remnants of the Joint Force Command, they're integrated back into the Joint Staff. You know, purple is sort of a nasty word, but if you look at the operational reality that we're all dealing with, you know, everybody's got brilliance in their own swim lane. We call everything different. You know, the Air Force is offensive counter-air, the Navy is AAW, the Army worries about SHORAD, the Marine Corps says I'm mobile and I'm not going to get hit. But we're all facing common threats, and particularly sort of the Joint Live Virtual Constructive thing, 2020 initiative, Joint Staff's doing. I'm really not seeing a purple solution to anything. And, you know, how do we address that?
Have someone individually that you want to address that to? Everybody. Oh, that was for Dr. Green.
I'll jump on this grenade. I tend to agree with your perspective about purple solutions in the sense of we might be answering a problem globally, but I do go for the purple solutions when we've got combinations, and by definition that's a purple solution. Our Chief of Staff of the Army, when he first took over, was asked a question: how is he going to articulate to the department's leadership and to Congress that we need to maintain an end strength, and if that means at the expense of the Navy or the Air Force, so we can maintain an end strength to execute the national military strategy? And I found his response to be pretty darn interesting. His response was, you know, if we get called to go to war, I want to have the best Navy in the world so I can get there across the water. And I want to be able to take out anything that's in the way. And once we get on land on the other side, I want to have the best Air Force in the world because I want to own the skies. And he said, then I'll worry about my Army. But I found that interesting because he looked at it from a joint perspective. And when we start dealing with various challenges of the future, being the 2025 or beyond, or a near peer in Russia, or you know, an ISIS down in the Middle East, I think we need to be taking a look at all the tools in our kit bag to be able to address with those. One particular solution may or may not be sufficient enough. It could be offset by the synergies that we bring in others to the table. Maybe I've missed the point of your question. If I do, I apologize. But in that case, I'll turn it over to my good friend in the Navy here to see if he can come in.
commonality of tools.
Sorry?
The focus is down a little bit. How do you increase the commonality of tools?
Okay, so truth in lending here, we just finished a joint analysis with MBA. So for us, joint includes defense agencies. And if you may not know that, ballistic missile defense is done through both MBA programs and Navy programs. And so when we do the analysis, we bring in both the defense agency that has part of the technical solution and then Navy that has the rest of it. So we just wrap that up and possibly a topic for next year to brief. But we do try and bring in partners. George and I are just working on an post-amphibious assault analysis because there's Navy equity in defending the space and there's Marine equity in getting ashore. I think we do better on bilats than we do on pure joint solutions. And I got here right when my colleagues were organizing and telling OSD that it was time to do joint campaign analysis again. And I can't second that enough, so I hope that does survive the administration.
Let me just add a couple of points to what's already been said, and especially as far as the bilats are concerned. One of the things that I can always anticipate that when we're in a session with my boss, Lieutenant General Walsh, and we're looking at a problem, whatever it might be, you can almost be sure that he's going to say, you know, this sounds similar to kinds of problems the Army might have or the Air Force. What are they doing? Have you talked to the Army? Have you talked to the Navy? Have you talked to the Air Force? I mean, just a couple of examples, and looking at the example that he gave on the LAV, light armored reconnaissance vehicle for the Marine Corps. You say, well, what is the next generation light armored reconnaissance vehicle that the Army is seeking, and have we looked into that as a possible solution? APS, just a subset of that active protection system and trying to protect these armored vehicles. He's saying, we're not going to go it alone. The Army has a large experiment going in the APS arena, and that we should join in on that experiment and so we can leverage what's going on. So we see that a lot in my organization, but more on the bilateral kinds of things. One of the things we have seen recently with the support to strategic analysis that's been mentioned and the campaign analysis that follows as the last step of the process, in that traditionally, 3 or 4 years ago, CAPE used to be responsible for the last stage of the process, which was the campaign analysis. So policy would develop the scenarios, joint staff would develop the CONOPS, and then CAPE would take it over and do a joint collaborative analysis involving all of the services, et cetera. CAPE stepped away from that role about 3 or 4 years ago. They don't do joint campaign analysis any longer, and that's kind of left a vacuum in the joint analytical arena. And so we've been struggling as a community trying to fill that vacuum. I can't say that we're doing it fully successfully, but there is an activity ongoing at the moment on one of the scenarios that is a relatively new scenario for us, in which we didn't have existing campaign analysis. And the Joint Staff J8 and the services all decided to join together to do a joint collaborative analysis. A lot of work being done in STORM, the joint campaign model, of preference for most of the services. The Army likes to focus a little bit more on a more detailed land campaign model, and so they bring in the JICM into that arena. And we have been doing analysis on a scenario which we'll leave unnamed at this point in time. We can talk about it across the street. Collaboratively, unfortunately, CAPE has not been part of that collaboration. We'd like to see them come back into the fold, but with the vacuum that's been left by them walking away from that sort of analysis, they've kind of left up to an ad hoc, collaborative way of doing business within the department. And at least I think we are stepping up to the bat and doing that at the moment.
I will just say, he mentioned it, STORM. The Air Force is the STORM model manager, but it just manages is sort of the focal point. You were speaking about naming common tools. I would say that is one place in which how to prosecute, how to treat, the rule set, the algorithm, whatever that we would use to work out each of the engagements. is one place to start. But everybody knows that every model has a group of enthusiasts around it. And so even in the Air Force, we have not done a very good job of establishing what tool is the one authoritative and how you doing. We're going to work through that, but kind of my view is until we have to do that, we probably, because we're satisfying the need. What is the answer what are we trying to eliminate? And if you have people who are good at using a particular model, you have to be very thoughtful about pulling those people away from that model before you transition and have an overall scheme. So I think we've got a long way to go in model standardization.
Let me just add to the STORM, because I think STORM is a true success story for the department. STORM started out as an Air Force model to replace the existing Air Force campaign model, and it was unilaterally started by the United States Air Force. At some point in time, the United States Navy said, why don't we work collaboratively to figure out how we can institute, and Robin Bell sitting there in the front row, who started that, let's do some maritime operations within STORM, and they started out by doing sort of a needs analysis. Where is STORM weak? What do we need to add to it? Remembering we don't want to get into the JWARS arena where we try to do everything for everybody, but keep this up at the campaign level. And so they developed a plan of action and over a number of years worked the maritime capabilities into STORM. We followed on the heels of that, and the Marine Corps again kind of mimicking what the Navy did and doing a needs analysis, figuring out where we needed to improve STORM, and then one by one kind of knock off the improvements in it. And the Army, while they maintain JICM, also maintain the models that feed STORM in terms of providing some of the land combat adjudication submodels that develop the data to feed on STORM. So I think STORM is a tremendous success from a joint collaborative tool effort.
Thank you very much. And we have plenty more questions. We have enough time for several more questions, just over 20 minutes left.
Standing up by the microphone, maybe I'll talk next.
That's all right.
All right, I'm Cy Stanek. I'm a retiree, so I'm here as a Moores devotee. And let me throw you a question that actually I'll present from sort of a Moores perspective. So we have two active communities of practice, affordability assessment and risk assessment. And I found it a little curious that I didn't hear either of those words mentioned much by our panel of experts. So I just throw you the opportunity in general. How are you seeing challenges presented, or are you, in either of those areas? And what do you see as the analytic challenges that we can address better in the future if Moores can contribute to progress in those areas? Affordability or risk assessment?
So I take it when you use the term risk, you're talking cost, schedule, and performance? I thought I'd wait until you got a bite in your mouth. You know? I take it when you use the term risk, you're talking cost, schedule, performance, kind of that kind of flavor?
More like defense strategy risk.
Okay.
Higher level, integrated.
Okay. I will tell you, for the affordability piece of this, coming at from that direction, we're probably more, at least our focus has been more on the operational side, particularly because of the support we've been doing to current operations. Most, at least within the Army, that slides over to our PA&E organization, which is similar to the N81 to talk the affordability stuff. And I know that they're embedded with just about every acquisition program for which an affordability now is a piece of. In terms of the risk portion of that, I believe we have been able to make some headway in developing some analytic methodologies over the past couple of years to look at the higher level risk, and I'll use that term meaning operational risk at the theater level, if that resonates with you. We started an effort off about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, called the Future World Technology Near-Peer Analysis, which took a theater level campaign fighting a war plan or a future scenario of some kind, and then baselined that with the near-peer, and then extracted various capability sets from the Blue Force and ran excursions off of those, and then went back, reset blue to the base case, and did a similar kind of thing to the red side. That combination of excursions between the two gave us a feel for where are those particular capabilities that can reduce the risk to the operational outcome, and where are those opportunities that we can increase the red risk by exploiting vulnerabilities in that particular scenario. So that has evolved since then to where we started integrating that into a more recent effort of the Long Range Research and Development Planning Program, the LRDEP thing that Frank Kendall and the DepSecDef have initiated, and we've rolled some of those technologies in there. So with all that background, I'll tell you, we have been making, I think, some headway at the operational level risk to be able to address that, and then to be able to quantifiably tie that to various capability sets that either increase your operational effectiveness and reduce your risk, or increase the risk on the other guy's side to be able to get to those. So that's how I respond to that.
Okay, so I think you probably aren't just talking about the risk to achieving national security objectives, but to characterize that. Whenever we do our analysis, our campaign analysis, we focus on a number of things, but there are a variety of risk factors. And I will tell you, we are always characterizing risk because we are very challenged with the budget and the program of record forces to achieve the national objectives. So we want senior leaders to understand. So for us, it's going to be attrition on the ground and time to complete the military objective. In the context of the other services, we're not just doing physics level models, which is very important in the mission. We do want to do the campaign piece. We'll say, and I probably won't be able to invite your, I won't provoke your thinking in this regard with my clumsy way what I'm about to say, but we do have again, Dr. Gallagher, very instrumental in setting up the C3 RAF. It's the Comprehensive Core Capability Risk Assessment Framework. For a moment, okay. So what the Air Force has decided, we want to collect our information about how well we can achieve the task of the DPG. We've divided the Air Force up into core functions that are owned not just by the major commands, like Air Combat Command owns 5. And they're responsible every year to bring in how they're going to deliver on the taskings. And it's captured, and we're actually leveraging the Navy's work here. They have a whole series of slide that will capture what the risk is, red, green, yellow, in any particular impact to that particular capability that's delivered. What we've done with very high order math that I am in awe of, that our staff came together to put together, is highly complicated, is to show that when you put all that stuff together, everybody's contribution to achieve the mission and the overall taskings, if you run the analysis, where is your network risk? So if you were to cut a program that looked like it was an easy target, then you played that through, you could find that you turned a number of missions that were able to achieve, or with some level of risk, made it much riskier. So it's network risk. It's very difficult. We're in the second year. We're on a 4-year plan to develop right now, frankly, I think only analysts understand it. And if you're in the audience, we know that not all of you agree with the approach, meaning because that's the way analysts are. But we still will compete our methodology and happy to have open dialogue about it, but the mechanics of it is what's hard because it's very data intensive. So that being said, we are trying to characterize risk in useful ways, but understanding how complex it is to make a palm decision, it's limited, but we're still committed. Mr. Williams is absolutely committed to getting C3 RAF up and functioning, and we do appreciate the Navy's work on which this is founded.
So you had 2 answers on the risk. I'll take the cost. We don't do cost analysis per se. Across the hall from us, NCCA, Navy Center for Cost Analysis, will project the cost of a future ship and say it's $700 million at a 30% confidence, or $750 million at a 40%. So those are acquisition-based cost analyses, similar to what the CA part of CAPE does. We do affordability analysis. We do the what if we are at DCA levels? What if we take a reduction in APN? So we do, given that that's the cost of a system, how do I build an affordable program? So I wouldn't call it cost analysis per se, but we do respect and use the output of people who do that.
I'll also kind of chime on terms of the affordability. In terms of the sort of division of work, typically the analytical community down in CITIC will do the cost analysis, and the programming community, PA&E up in, at PNR at the Pentagon, will do the affordability analysis. Affordability analysis is something near and dear to my heart, and if you talk to Kirk Michelson, I bugged them a lot about making sure when they stood up the community of practice that we had to discern between cost analysis and affordability analysis. And a lot of the initial discussions, I don't think made that distinction clear. I think we need to better understand what affordability really is. Cost analysis is, in a sense, straightforward. How much does it cost to design it? How much does it cost to build it? What's it cost to support it? Not that it's easy, but it's, I think, somewhat straightforward. Affordability analysis is not at all straightforward because I don't think there's a real definition of affordability. How much can you afford? Well, it depends on what this thing is worth compared to what you're willing to give up in order to get this thing. And to me, it's a much more complex problem in terms of understanding affordability compared to understanding cost. And so hopefully I've pushed the community of practice into making those distinctions a little bit more than they did at the very birth of that community. But unfortunately, we don't get involved in my organization very much because of the division of labor between cost and affordability analysis.
Great question. Just for the record, Moores has 4 communities of practice. Each meets monthly, so affordability, risk, wargaming, and cost analysis. We just had a great differentiating discussion about cost versus affordability. Next question.
I'm Mike Bailey from the Marine Corps. As you might have seen about 2 months ago in Defense One, Secretary Carter blasted his own bureaucracy for suppressing the professional development of government civilian employees. That to me seemed like a green light for Moores to grow and expand its events and its activities. So I have 2 questions. First question is, do you think that he said that? And the second question is, what are you doing about it?
Do I think he said it? Yes. I think Frank Kendall had a lot to do with it. And what am I doing about it? Well, right now it seems like I'm beating my head against a wall trying to break down. I think the Army's probably got the greatest bureaucracy right now in getting approval to attend conferences. And in fact, I think he even cited in that article that the Army is probably lagging behind the other services in being able to streamline the process. But we may be dealing with some entropy here in which we've built organizations to execute a process that is a little bit tough to dismantle or to change the process. But nonetheless, Mike, I'll tell you, I'll keep beating my head against that wall, and maybe it'll break open or before my head does. So that's where I am on it.
This is not the first time we've had an opportunity to jump on senior decision level memos, direction, et cetera. I believe it was a few years ago when AT&L came out with some guidance that said something on the order of educational forums for technical, scientific types of activities should be strongly encouraged. I guess we're now getting that broadened by Secretary Carter. I wish we could figure out how to get the senior decision makers to understand and translate that into action. I think we've probably had a modicum of success. For example, the threshold for holding conferences has been raised, and the decision to hold this conference and get approval from the Department of Defense was actually delegated down to the Marine Corps. Now, it still was a huge bureaucracy in getting the approval, and I gotta say, I was not that comfortable when a month or 6 weeks ago, the lines were not fully signed by all of the senior Marine Corps decision makers. But I guess that is a start in the sense that once the senior decision makers in the Marine Corps said, okay, this is a legitimate conference, you can go forward with it, that they didn't then have to go up to the Secretary of the Navy and say, Mother may I, on that. So we are making progress, but that progress is minimal, and I would hope that we can continue to make progress in the future. If we, either the Moores people or the sponsors, had any say in this would be a piece of cake. Unfortunately, we don't, and we have to fight the same bureaucracy that, you know, that everybody else has.
That's a question for Norm as well.
Wait, can I, Mike, can I jump on that, please? I was deferring to Forrest. I think he meant it, I think indirectly, because last weekend we got a take-home from Admiral Richardson, which was OpNav Civilian Development Guide draft form for revisions and comments. So I think it's an indication that the senior leadership of the services are getting that direction. From the Navy perspective, Robin and I just hosted Jeff Hine from postgrad school. Jeff, here? Does our Master's in Systems Analysis course. And we were talking about the fact that we manage our active duty community better than we manage our civilian community. So let me announce that next year, when we go up to West Point, we're looking to have a morning session like we used to back in the good old days. After the 3 days of Moores, anybody who's not leaving first thing Friday morning, we'd like to have the Navy OR community get together for a session. So we're going to try and reinvigorate the Navy civilian OR community, and appreciate the softball.
Okay, you aren't going to like this answer. I will just, having been at OSD when this unrolled, this whole thing with sequestration, at the time I was working in the HR community. That's a very passionate group of people. And I had educators and force developers and the HR community itself. They cannot conduct their trade without annual exchanges of information. It's because they're actually very specialized, very transaction oriented. And though you want to say, go to a website, how you doing? Someone's got to stand that thing up. So OPM does have something called HR University. I'm getting to my point. And if there was ever an organization that wanted to get this right, because here we're downside, you know, people want to understand, well, you have to put a 20-page frequently asked question about sequestration for civilian workforce on your website that tells you this is not trivial. So of all the functional areas you wanted to be ready to help the workforce through with the HR community, there was no way you could penetrate the concern of the administration, senior leadership at OSD. Yes, they got it. Too bad. You're going to have to miss this educator session. You have to, and their skills attrited. I mean, I don't have a measurable thing for you on that. But it's not that the PNR, for instance, the Undersecretary for Personnel Affairs, didn't understand how important it was. And I thought about Moores as well. All the professional organizations. The problem is, until you can get the trust built back, the courage of the senior most leadership to say, we need this thing. It's never just that we're passionate about where OR stands and how important this fora is to us. Equally passionate are other functional areas. So if you let one do it, then the other do. And so we have to, what our most senior leadership has to be prepared for is to address, okay, now across the board, we spent X thousand dollars, can we show the return? This is why there's always this tension in the system between developing your force and people who are passionate advocating for it, when you can, because sometimes you just can't, and I know you all lived through that. So I'll just say that I'm actually not aware specifically what the Air Force is doing as a response to that, but I'll take that as an action.
Mike, I believe you wanted me to answer too. Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, so really as Moores, you know, we don't directly influence, you know, what the services, their approval process. We support the best that we can for our sponsors to get approval. However, on the professional development side, we heard that loud and clear several years ago. The Moores presidents from several presidents ago started the ball rolling with Moores increasing what we do to provide professional development for you at all levels of your career. So we started this year, we wrapped up our first year where we have a VP for professional development, which may mean something to you and may not, but really the key is we have a very focused effort across several of our committees where things get done to develop and make sure that we have professional development through this society that you can use in your job. Part of that, we have a continuing education committee led by Walter Grange this year, and we're moving very rapidly to start developing more courses that you can use. For example, this year we have our first certificate in wargaming, which is a series of continuing education classes that will help you get there. We've continued to ramp up our tutorials at every session that we have or every meeting that we have. And we have our education and professional development colloquium, which this year we've been very focused on students and we want to maintain that focus, but we also want to bring in the executive leadership and mid to senior level career to help them, give them some additional tools to develop their career. So hopefully that answered your question. We have time for one more question. This gentleman, oh, we have Phil. Okay, we can do 2 more?
Let's get DHS in here.
Okay, and then Phil will be our last.
Good morning, panel. My name is Mark Adams. I'm with the Systems Engineering Office at S&T at DHS. And we have an analytical crisis that maybe you could give me some recommendations and some help. As you see, we don't have a 5th chair up here. Dr. Dargan sends his apologies, he couldn't make it. But in his shop of operations, requirements, and analysis, he has 6 ORSAs. I make the 7th ORSA at S&T. And across all of DHS, when you pull down the HR files, look for the 1515 series, there's less than 36. Fluctuates between 36 and 32. I don't know the Coast Guard numbers. I don't even know if they have a MOS for operations research. So if you talk about disparate and distributed analysis capabilities, we have a very thin, uncoordinated analytical support for the Homeland Security mission. How can we go about, what steps can you recommend for me to help S&T establish a stronghold, a foothold, an analytical process into the Homeland Security enterprise?
Okay, that was not a softball. Can the Coast Guard folks raise their hand again? All right, so you do have an OR department in DHS. It's called the Coast Guard. I got my master's in Connecticut, and Joe Smith, not made up name, was one of our professors. He taught at the Coast Guard Academy and did some evening courses for us. I do work, when I was at OSD PA&E, they were standing up that organization. They came down and we explained the defense planning scenarios and how we do the force structure requirements. So there's a nascent capability there. I would recommend utilizing them and growing it, at least so you're not starting with a clean sheet of paper. But we have had good relations with Coast Guard Oracle.
You're a lot more familiar with that problem than I am. I would probably take his advice over what I was going to offer. What I was going to offer was Mike give some thought into trying to capture what the decision space is that your senior leadership has to deal with. Because at the end of the day, that's what the analysis is intended to address. The reason I offer that as advice is because just within the past year, despite the fact that the headquarters Department of the Army is decreasing by 25%, we were able to get our Vice Chief of Staff to increase our authorizations by about 10%. But using the decision space approach, saying, sir, these are the kinds of decisions that we support. Do you want us to continue to do that, or do you want us to drop those functions? So I would offer that as perhaps a way ahead.
Well, let me just say, I can't help you with your personnel problems, but I do think you're taking a good first step in terms of looking toward a broader community for collaboration. And I think that the Moores and being a sponsor of Moores is definitely one area that you guys can take advantage of and you know, work at least collaboratively to the extent you can with the contacts you make here. Let me put in another plug, because you mentioned ORSA and S&T, and both Forrest and I are U.S. representatives to a NATO panel, works for the chief scientists S&T organization within NATO, and that is a systems analysis and studies panel. So they have a lot of very technical robotics and vehicles and stuff, and then they have an analysis panel. And we would welcome you know, DHS participation in that panel. It's a way to collaboratively leverage S&T capabilities across all of the NATO nations. And feel free to give me a point, you know, give me a holler after this, or catch me sometime, and I can give you as much information as you like about that if you want to get more involved in that.
This doesn't surprise anybody that I would like to add to that. Okay, a couple things. Remember that your AUX series on your civilian positions are fungible. So I would suggest you look at this as a competition. So a couple of approaches is become familiar with the people who make decisions about the organization structure, and figure out if you've got progression within your entity. I mean, you've got the uniform people, which is cool, but if you just have some idea of if you want to grow internally to a certain grade level, like a GS-15 or even an SLST, I mean, if you start thinking that way, people understand progression. Now, they may argue that, well, it doesn't all have to happen here, but you might be able to make the case that, well, you know, organic analysis, when you really understand stuff, even though the principles of OR are, you know, apply across, there might be real value, particularly if you're not trying to be seen as building an empire. And so we both know that, we all know that what will happen when you start bringing analysts in is people want more because we do really good insightful work, and especially if you're a civilian, you're going to be staying for a while if they like what they're doing. But you do want to encourage rotation, attrition. So as your other positions attrit, I'm not picking, say there's a logistics cell somewhere, and they have 10 people, and you say, well, you know, so-and-so's leaving. So I think that we could use it as 15-15. So just some thoughts.
Great question. And next year, we hope to add 2 chairs or 2 other more sponsors, OSD and Department of Homeland Security. So we're looking forward to them joining us next year. We have one more question, and that is...
I'll give a quick fastball for you all. Earlier, I'm Phil Cornell. I worked at the Outstanding Assessment. Used to be work at N81 over a decade ago. So go back to what Dr. Axe was referring to earlier about the success of STORM from a bottom-up perspective, in contrast to the failure of JWARS from the top down. And so the question becomes, how would that model fare in the SSA discussion? There's a vacuum. There was a vacuum before in the analytic realm, and it was filled from a bottom-up perspective. Would the SSA be successful from a bottom-up perspective in this vacuum, vice the top-down approach that in another world did not succeed?
Well, I think you're seeing a lot of activity. I mean, the SSA process officially is a top-down process. I think there are tri-chairs, joint staff, policy, and CAPE. And theoretically, everything is supposed to emanate from the tri-chairs on down to the services, et cetera. In practice, I think that some of the members of the steering committee for the SSA are not fully satisfied with the direction that they're getting from the senior leadership of the SSA. And so you're seeing activities like the development of an analytical baseline from the bottom up. And that's a start, and I suspect that we will see more of that. We may see some in the wargaming activities and have that expand as well. And so I think by necessity and by just the nature of some of the personalities of the service reps to the SSA, we are seeing somewhat of a revolution in trying to shift the direction strictly from coming from the top down to going from the bottom up. Now, if the top down starts to conform more to what we think are the overall needs of the department, that may not be necessary. But in the meanwhile, I think you will see this activity and perhaps more coming from the bottom up.
If I can just pick up on your analogy, I spent a few years with JWARS. It was painful. Never want to go through that again. But I think STORM is at a crucial moment where right now you have 3 services, and someday maybe all 4, in which case that becomes an irresistible force. I think that's the critical mass, because right now, the top-down part that's missing is, yeah, we build our programs, we do our 5-year plans, we support that with analysis, and then we throw it down to the third deck, where there is no campaign analysis. So people are making decisions on our force structure investments without having the benefit of quantifiable analysis. And they say we can do it by mission analysis, and you can to a point, but at some point you're trading platforms in that mission versus platforms in that mission, and God forbid you do trades across services. So although you can bottom up and grow a good model, you have to top down the leadership decisions. And I think until somebody at OSD takes ownership of doing quantifiable analysis at the campaign level, I don't see how we succeed.
Well, I agree entirely on that one, Chuck. And I think just a couple of years ago, when we were over at the Mark Center, Trip Barber made some very pointed comments during this panel discussion about the OSD and the Joint Staff walking away from campaign allowances. And that has been felt across the community, I think, for some time, and I'm hopeful that perhaps we might make some progress across that. But I do agree with you, it's going to take something along those lines before we can finally get into thing. And I'll tell you, I mean, you know, everybody but the Army is playing Storm, we play Chicken. And we have taken a look at that, and we've explored the possibility of transitioning or doing both in-house, so we've got those capabilities. There are a couple of things that are obstacles for us to overcome that challenge, to make that transition. One of them is in what's called the Total Army Analysis process, whereby we use the campaign simulations output, and we've tied that to our sustainment model for it. So we got models that are tied to one another in that to do our, if you will, our Title 10 responsibilities. So we've got an issue there. The other side of that is okay, if we had, and I don't want to do the whine about unlimited resources, but given the downsizing and the constraints and just our capacity to be able to make that transition makes it very difficult to where we'd probably be faced with turning something off for a period of time in order to ramp up a new capability on that. I don't see us having the flexibility. The other thing, that we still deal with the COCOMs and the service components, for which in several cases they still use JICM as their primary land campaign model. So about not a half, I'd say a third of our program is support and work with the COCOMs and the service components. So if we drop that capability, we wouldn't be able to be on the same level with them. It would put us on with the other services. And it just in particular, USFK, I think they've got some folks that are here. They are one of the few places that employs multiple theater level simulations. EADSIM, Storm, they even had ITEM at one time, I think. I don't know if they still have that. And they've got JICM. I make a point of going by there every year because when I look at a COCOM's campaign analysis capability, that one to me is the closest thing that looks right. It really is. PACOM is absent one, UCOM is absent one, CENTCOM's probably on the same par or close second in terms of their capability, but that's about it when you get out there. And I asked the guys, I said, look, you know, I'm faced with the potential way ahead on theater simulations in the JICM Storm discussion. And I said, what would you guys do? And they said, maintain your JICM until you've got the flexibility to do something differently. So, you know, that's one of the commands that we support big time, particularly when it comes to that part of the world. So that's where we are. That's where we are in the whole discussion.
So I was trying to be sure I understood the question, so if I answer this, I missed the mark, apologies. Analytically, we have the advantage of being able to clearly explain what we did and why we did it. And what is so impressive is exactly to say we are working together with under the Joint Staff's leadership because we're just having some issues working with OSD. They're having some challenges as well. It's just so. We can come together and explain how in a war fight we would produce a result. Then there are the service comms. Now, hopefully, with the measures we're required to use to show the green, red, yellow, and so forth, it captures adequately what OSD is looking for. But I do feel like what we have in that dialogue with OSD is they want to be sure that you've characterized the risk correctly, and they're going to be the outside person looking in. And in the end, because it's a fixed amount of dough, somebody's going to lose something if OSD sees it differently. And in the end, we all surface bills that cannot be paid because we believe, well, this isn't really Air Force bill. This should be shared and so forth. Well, we don't get to decide that. We have a top line. We have to fund what we have and characterize the risk. So I guess what I'm trying to say is SSA has applicability to a point, and then the Secretary of Defense has to decide under his staff's advice whether we deliver against the President's taskings to us, and if Congress is going to see it the same way. So there's a lot. I feel like the SSA, when we do work together, and we're increasingly doing so, we can at least coherently answer the question sort of the same way every time it's asked, no matter which service answers it. But after that, we kind of all lose control of it. But I don't know if that. So I don't know how much is on the horizon of possible with the SSA, but we're certainly going to work closely together.
Great. Well, I tell you what, that was a good last question. Thanks, Phil. Thank you as the audience. You guys had great questions today, really helped round out our panel discussion. And I want to thank each of our more sponsors who are here today. I want to add 2 more chairs next year. But thank you for thank you very much. Enjoy your notes.